I do is when I'm discussing passages, right, or when I'm reading them, I always talk about effective reading strategies, right? So there are 8 effective reading strategies that, like I've discussed with my students in class. I can't discuss all 8 of them right now, but the main one that you need to follow is that when you're reading a passage, an RC, you have to focus on extracting the main idea. When you're done reading the passage, you should be able to extract the main idea in 2 to 3 sentences. So I always tell my students, focus on the main idea, don't get stuck on the details. Your job is not to understand each and every word and sentence of the passage, right? Your job is to extract the main idea. So don't get stuck on words and sentences, just extract the main idea after you're done reading the passage. All right? Okay, let's discuss this. So what does it say? I have elaborated a framework for analyzing the contradictory pulls on Indian nationalist ideology in its struggle against the dominance of colonialism and the resolution it offered to those contradictions. Okay, all right. So it's talking about Indian nationalist ideology struggle against the dominance of colonialism, right? And it talks about some contradictory pulls which we don't understand as of now. Let's carry on. Briefly, this resolution, the resolution that the ideology offered, this resolution was built around a separation of the domain of culture into 2 spheres. All right. What are the spheres? The material and the spiritual. It was in the material sphere that the claims of Western civilization were the most powerful. Science, technology, rational forms of economic organization, modern methods of statecraft, these had given the European countries the strength to subjugate the non-European people. Okay, so European countries here, colonialists, okay, they subjugated the European people through the material, using the material sphere. All right, and they talk about what that material sphere is, right? They were more powerful in the material sphere. And what is the material sphere? Science, technology, those are the examples that the author has given. To overcome this domination in the material sphere, the colonized people had to learn those superior techniques of organizing material life and incorporate them within their own cultures, right? So they were being overpowered because the colonialists were dominant in the material sphere. So to overcome this domination, the colonized people had to learn those techniques. But, okay, it's a transition word. Whenever there is a but, right, this transition word, the author changes tracks, goes in the opposite direction. But this could not mean the imitation of the West in every aspect of life. For then, the very distinction between the West and the East would vanish. The self-identity of national culture would itself be threatened. So to overcome this domination, the colonized people, which we can say is the East in this case, we can infer that the East had to learn those superior techniques from the West. Or rather, the East had to learn those superior techniques that the West already knew. But this could not mean the imitation of the West in every aspect of the life. So East is imitating West in one aspect, but this doesn't mean that East is imitating West in all aspects. Why? Because East wanted to maintain their own identity. Okay, so this paragraph we've read, right? Now let's try to extract the main point. That's what I do. I read the paragraph, and this is a very good technique. You read one paragraph, and it's a pretty lengthy paragraph. Extract the main point. Make a mental note of the main point. You can even write it down. If let's say you say that, okay, my comprehension is not that great, you can write down that main point. But it's going to take additional time. But that's fine. If it helps you with comprehension, go ahead and do that. If you can just take the mental note, pause for a few seconds, take a mental note, and then move on. So let's take that note. What is this paragraph talking about? Okay, it's definitely talking about national ideology, right? So there is a national ideology or the nationalist ideology that is struggling against the dominance of colonialism. Why are the colonialists dominant? Because they are dominant in the material sphere. Okay, sorry, 1 second. Right, so there are 2 spheres being spoken about in this passage, in this paragraph, right? The resolution was built around the separation of domain of culture into 2 spheres. What are those 2 spheres? There's material and there is spiritual. Okay, now in the material sphere, the West or the colonialists are dominant. Okay, so what the East does is, to overcome this domination, the East sort of imitates the West. In one aspect. So they imitate the West in one aspect while retaining the other aspects because they want to retain their identity. That's the main point of this first paragraph. Okay, all right, let's move on. Now, the discourse of nationalism shows that the material spiritual distinction, okay, there is a material spiritual distinction, right? Because there are two spheres, was condensed into an analogous but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy. Okay, now there are two sort of words that can be unfamiliar, right? See, usually I tell people don't get stuck on unfamiliar words. Try to understand them through context. Okay, like you will encounter situations where you will encounter some unfamiliar words. So don't get stuck. Try to understand them through context. So let's try to do that. Discourse of nationalism shows that the material spiritual distinction was condensed into an analogous. Analogous means comparable, but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy, that between the outer and the inner. Now you have to understand this. Let's say you don't understand dichotomy, no problem. What this sentence is doing is, it's talking about the material spiritual distinction and it's comparing this with the distinction between outer and inner. There are two aspects here. The material spiritual distinction that we spoke about in the first paragraph, and here it's being compared with another distinction, that of the outer and inner. And the author is saying the material spiritual distinction was analogous but ideologically far more powerful. All right, okay. Applying the inner outer distinction to the matter of concrete day-to-day living separates the social space into ghar and bahir, the home and the world. The world is the external, the domain of the material. Okay, so we have inner and outer. Outer is the world, which represents the material. The home represents one's inner spiritual self. So you see the connection now? Material spiritual, inner outer. Material is outer, spiritual is inner. The home represents one's inner spiritual self, one's true identity. The world is a treacherous terrain of the pursuit of material interests, where practical considerations reign supreme. It is also typically the domain of the male. Now they're bringing in a gender here. Be conscious of that. The home in its essence must remain unaffected by the profane activities of the material world, and woman is its representation. Very interesting. And so one gets an identification of social roles by gender to correspond with the separation of the social space into ghar and bahir. Now let's try to simplify this. What's the main point here? You have your material and spiritual, right? This is coming from the first paragraph, the two spheres of culture. Material is being equated with outer. Spiritual is being equated with inner, the outer world and the home. Then in terms of gender, outer is being equated with male and inner is being equated with female. That's the main point. Keep it simple. Don't look at it broadly and extract the main point. Don't try to understand each and every line here. Now, let's say for instance, we don't understand dichotomy. Even without getting into the meaning of dichotomy, we were able to figure this out. So that's the whole idea. Extract the main point, don't get stuck on details. Okay, so the gender thing has come here now. So male is being equated with material, female is being equated with spiritual. All right, let's continue. The colonial situation and the ideological response of nationalism to the critique of Indian tradition introduced an entirely new substance to these dichotomies and affected their transformation. Okay, the material spiritual dichotomy, to which the terms world and home corresponded, had acquired a very special significance in the nationalist mind. So it's extending that concept now. Okay, the world was where the European power had challenged the non-European peoples, and by virtue of its superior material culture had subjugated them. Right? So that's correct, right? Because where the colonialists were powerful in this area, okay, and outer is nothing but your world. So they were powerful in this area, and that's how they subjugated the East. Okay, all right. But the nationalists asserted it had failed to colonize the inner essential identity of the East, which lay in its distinctive and superior spiritual culture. So that means they were able to subjugate the East in the outer world, but not in the spiritual world. At least that's what the nationalists asserted. That they were able to overpower us in the outer world, but our spiritual identity remained intact or was superior. Okay. In the entire phase of the national struggle, the crucial need was to protect, preserve, and strengthen the inner core of the national culture, its spiritual essence. So what's the main point here? The main point here is that the West, okay, overpowered or subjugated the East. Okay. In what? When it comes to the material world. But the nationalists assert that when it came to the spiritual world or spiritual essence, the East maintained its identity and the West was not able to overpower that. Okay, and that's what the nationalists sort of strived for. They wanted to protect, preserve, and strengthen the inner core of the national culture, which is its spiritual essence. Okay, all right, let's continue. Last paragraph. Once we match this new meaning of the home world dichotomy with the identification of social roles by gender, we get the ideological framework within which nationalism answered the woman's question. It's a complex sentence. Let's move on. It would be a grave error to see in this, as liberals are apt to, in their despair at the many marks of social conservatism in nationalist practice, a total rejection of the West. Now simplify this sentence. Okay, this part is additional. Remember, look at the sentence construction. Don't get confused. That's an additional clause. So what does it say? It would be a grave error to see in this a total rejection of the West. That is the main part. It would be a grave error to see in this a total rejection of the West. And this rejection is often seen by liberals. That's what the author is saying. So simplify the construction. Okay. So it says it would be a grave error to see in this a total rejection of the West. Quite the contrary, the nationalist paradigm in fact supplied an ideological principle of selection. So what does this paragraph say? That the East did not reject the West completely. And think about it, they did not, right? Because in the material world, the East imitated the West. But in the spiritual identity, they retained their identity. So this was not a complete rejection of the West. It says it was an ideological principle of selection. Okay, so that's where it ends. Now, what's the main idea of this entire passage? Think about it. Okay, we've made some notes, right? What is the central theme that's running in this passage? You definitely have to incorporate material, sorry about this, and spiritual. Okay, that's why one of you, I think Sanskriti, I told you that one element was missing. I think the material part didn't really come out in your main idea. Okay, so there's material and spiritual, right? Material is being equated to male, spiritual is being equated to female. Okay, now when it comes to the East scores here in the spiritual essence, the spiritual aspect, they retain their identity. But the West scores in the material world, and that's how in this aspect they were able to subjugate the East. Okay, and if you want to bring in the home world inner outer dichotomy, you can do that as well. We have taken a note. Material is your outer or world, spiritual is your inner or home. This is actually the main idea of this passage. Okay, I know I gave you a long explanation. That's typically how I do it. All right, okay, perfect. So now let's go to the interesting bit. Okay, and let's try to solve the questions. This passage is definitely complex, by the way. Okay, in slot 2, in fact in all the slots in CAT 21, this was one of the difficult passages. The language is not very straightforward. It's abstract, and also it's abstract. It's not something which is concrete, right? It speaks about spirituality and materialism and nationalism and all of that. So it's a little abstract. The language is complex. Now we can hope that the questions are are manageable, but in this case you will see the questions were also tricky. Okay, all right. Anyway, let's go to question number 1. Okay, this is what we're going to do. Read the question carefully. Please read each and every word. Don't rush into it. Look at all the options and then pick the best option. Okay, which one of the following, if true, would weaken the author's claims in the passage? Okay, now you've gone for first choice was option 4. Okay, then you've gone for option 2, that's your second choice, 29% of you voted. Then 1 is your third choice, 25% of you voted, and then finally we have very few takers for 3. Okay, all right, let's see what the answer is now. Now it's a tricky question. It's a critical reasoning question right up front. So complex passage, tricky question. Yeah, it's one of those situations. Which one of the following, if true, would weaken the author's claims in the passage? So this is a CR question, critical reasoning question. Okay, they're asking you to weaken the author's claims in the passage. Now, before we go into the options, let's try to understand this question. See, whenever it says if true, right? If true simply means that you have to assume that each option is absolutely true. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the options given to you, you have to assume that they are true. You don't contest the options. Okay, assume that they are true. Okay, now when you assume that they are true, which one would weaken the author's claims in the passage? So the author has definitely made some claims in the passage, right, regarding East and West and material and spiritual and outer and inner and all of that. So we have to choose an option that weakens the author's claims. Now, what does weaken mean? An option that brings in a doubt. That's what weaken means. Okay, weaken doesn't mean invalidating the author's claims completely. It just means bringing in some kind of doubt. The author's making certain claims. The option that is the correct option would bring in a doubt in the author's claims. There's a difference. Bringing in a doubt versus completely invalidating it. We're looking for a doubt. So the option that brings in the most amount of doubt will be the correct answer. Okay, let's look at this. Now we'll go option by option. Now, first of all, what was the main idea before that? Because author's claims is nothing but the main idea, right? We said material, spiritual. Okay, the West subjugated the East based on material, but the East had an upper hand and retained their spiritual identity. Okay, then of course you had the male-female bit as well. Okay, let's continue. Option number 1. Indian nationalists rejected the cause of English education for women during the colonial period. Okay, so of course, you know, the nationalists were in opposition to the colonialists, right, per the passage. So this option is saying Indian nationalists rejected the cause of English education for women during the colonial period. Okay, so does this weaken the author's claims? What is the author saying in the passage? Is the author saying that nationalists accepted everything that the colonialists gave them? Does the passage say that the East accepted everything that the West said that they should do? Is the passage saying that the East was completely subjugated in all aspects by the West? The passage is not saying that. The passage is saying that the West subjugated the East in the material domain, but in the spiritual domain, they had an upper hand. Okay, and towards the end, it also talks about ideology of selection. So what does that mean? The East selected some aspects of the West, but rejected some aspects of the West. Right? So here the option is saying Indian nationalists rejected the cause of English education for women during that colonial period. What is the problem in this? There's no problem. Anyway, the passage says the East accepted some, rejected some. So this might be one of the rejections. Okay, so this does not weaken the author's claims. This actually aligns with the author's claims because it is like that. Accept some, reject some. Okay, so this doesn't weaken the author's claims. In fact, it's aligned to the author's claims. Okay, all right. Let's go to number 2. This was the second choice. Forces of colonial modernity played an important role in shaping anti-colonial Indian nationalism. Forces of colonial modernity played an important role in shaping anti-colonial Indian nationalism. So Indian nationalism per the passage was definitely anti-colonial. Anti-colonial in some aspects. Right? So forces of colonial modernity played an important role in shaping anti-colonial Indian nationalism. How does it weaken it? Where does it talk about modernity? Let's see that. Is there any mention of modernity here? Yeah. So for instance, it says it was in the material sphere that the claims of Western civilization were the most powerful. All right. Science, technology, rational forms of economic organization, modern methods of statecraft. These had given the European countries the strength to subjugate the non-European people. So the modern methods had given the European people or the colonialists or the West the upper hand. To overcome this domination, the colonized people had to learn those superior techniques of organizing material life and incorporate them within their cultures. Look at this. This is aligned. The option says forces of colonial modernity played an important role in shaping anti-colonial Indian nationalism. How did the Indian nationalism came about? For the passage, because the West was subjugated. Excuse me. The West was subjugating the East in the modern material world, and that's how this anti-nationalism movement started, or the whole ideology started. So it gave way to that. So these forces of colonial modernity definitely played an important role in shaping anti-colonial Indian nationalism, because the East was subjugated because of that. So obviously they're going to resist that. So this is aligned with the passage. This is not your answer. Okay, let's go to 3. The Industrial Revolution played a crucial role in shaping the economic prowess of Britain in the 18th century. This is fine. This is true. This is true for the passage. The Britain or the West, the colonialists, became powerful because of their sort of industrial or the industries or the science technology. So this is aligned to the passage. This is not your answer. Okay. Let's look at 4. The colonial period saw the hybridization of Indian culture in all realms as it came in contact with British European culture. Hybridization. What does hybridization mean? You have your Indian culture. Sorry. Okay. And you have the British culture. If you're saying the Indian culture became hybrid, that means it borrowed everything from the British culture. It says all realms. Did the Indian culture accept everything from the British culture? No. They accepted only the material aspect. The spiritual aspect they rejected, and they didn't reject it, they just retained their own identity. So the hybridization didn't happen in all realms. It only happened in the material world. So if this is true, remember it says if true. If this is true and the hybridization happened in all realms, it weakens the author's claims. Because the author says it didn't happen in all realms, it didn't happen in spiritual realm. So if this is true, it brings in a doubt and it weakens the author's claims. Hence, your answer is 4. Okay? Alright, let's move on, folks. Let's go to the next question. Okay, RC3 question 2. So, yeah, this is more split. This is more split than the last time. So you folks found this a little more tricky than the last one. Okay, and it is tricky. It's not a straightforward question. So your top choices are 2 and 3 with equal votes. 34% of you chose 2, and 34% of you chose 3. 18% of you chose 1, and 12% of you have chose 4. So there are takers for all 4 options. And 34 equal split between 2 and 3. Okay, let's look at this. Now let's understand this question. That's why I always say when you come to read, when you're reading the questions, never increase your speed. Be very slow and deliberate when you're reading the questions. Read each and every word very carefully. Okay, if you miss one word, your answer can be completely wrong. So read each and every word of the question and each of the options before you decide the answer. Okay, all right. Which one of the following best describes the liberal perception of Indian nationalism? The question does not say which one of the following best describes the Indian nationalism. Okay, it says best describes the liberal perception of Indian nationalism. So first of all, we have to find out from the passage what is the liberal perception of Indian nationalism. Now, if you've read it effectively, you would have a mental map which would tell you that this was mentioned somewhere in the last paragraph. Okay, and when we were understanding the main idea, right, you probably didn't understand this sentence. It is absolutely fine because it was not a part of the main idea. Our job was to extract the main idea, which we did successfully. This was a detail. You might not have understood it when you read the whole passage, but now you have a mental map. Go back, reread it, understand it, and then come and answer the question. First of all, understand what is the liberal perception. Let's go back of Indian nationalism. I'm going to remove this. Okay. All right. It says it would, okay, read the whole paragraph. Once we match this new meaning of the home world dichotomy with the identification of social roles by gender, okay, so you have the home world dichotomy and you have the female male, right? Okay. So once we match, we get the ideological framework within which nationalism answered the women's question. It would be a grave error to see in this a total rejection of the West. That's how I told you to simplify the statement, right? This was additional. So it would be a grave error to see in this a total rejection of the West. And who sees it like this? Liberals. Understand this statement. As liberals are apt to, in their despair at the many marks of social conservatism in nationalist practice. So that means what the sentence is saying is the moment liberals see any sort of indication of social conservatism in nationalist practice, okay, they would think that the East has completely rejected the West, which according to the author is an error. So author says it would be a grave error to see in this that the nationalism ideology completely rejected the West. According to the author, that's not true. But the liberals see it like this. Okay, the liberals think that the nationalist ideology completely rejected the West, whereas the author says this is an error because the nationalism paradigm in fact supplied an ideological paradigm of selection, selecting some aspects, rejecting some aspects, whereas liberals think, oh, the nationalist ideology rejects the West completely. Okay, all right, so that's how the liberals are perceiving the nationalist ideology. Let's go back. Which one of the following best describes the liberal perception of Indian nationalism? Now we know what the liberal perception is. Let's try to match it. Indian nationalism embraced the changes brought about by colonialism in Indian women's traditional gender roles. Is this what the liberals think? That Indian nationalism embraced the changes brought about by colonialism in Indian women's traditional gender roles. If Indian nationalism is embracing changes, the West, think about it, the liberals are saying that nationalism completely rejected, that's what they believe in, completely rejected the West. So if the option is saying Indian nationalism embrace the changes, if they embrace the changes, it's going against the liberal perception. Okay, Indian nationalist discourses reaffirm traditional gender roles for Indian women. Indian nationalist discourses reaffirm traditional gender roles for Indian women. Think about this option. If this is true, okay, Indian nationalist discourses reaffirm traditional gender roles for Indian women. That means the nationalists stuck to their beliefs. They rejected the West, stuck to their beliefs. Right? And the liberal believe that the nationalist ideology completely rejects the West. This kind of aligns. Let's park this. Okay? Indian nationalism's sophistication resided in its distinction of the material from the spiritual spheres. That is not the liberal perception. The liberal perception is about rejection, complete rejection of the West. The liberal perception is not about the distinction. So this is not your answer. Indian nationalist discourses provided an ideological principle of selection. If the liberals believed in this, then where is the rejection? The author believes in this. The liberal believes it's rejection. The author believes that it's selection. So this is not your answer. The correct answer is definitely this. Number 2. Okay? Because if the nationalists are reaffirming their own roles, their own beliefs, that means they're rejecting the West, which is what the liberals believe in. Alright? Okay, let's move on. Alright. Hopefully, let's see if this is a manageable question. We'll run the poll. Please answer the question. Okay, so there is more of a majority in this one. So you didn't find this indicator that you didn't find this as tricky as the last one. 48% of you chose 3, almost half. Okay, this is your first option. 37% of you, so this is close, chose 4. All right, so this is your second choice, and the 37-48 is close. So 3 and 4 kind of confused you. Okay, 11% of you chose 2, so this is your third choice. Very few takers for the first option. Okay, all right, let's see this. On the basis of the information in the passage, obviously, all questions are based on the information in the passage. All of the following are true about the spiritual material dichotomy of Indian nationalism, except. Now, there is an except here. Now, it's very, see, except is in capital letters. Hopefully, they'll always give except in capital letters, but watch out for it. You never know. Sometimes they might just trick you, right? So be careful with these questions. See, I always tell my students, if this question is confusing you, read it without the except first. Okay, what does it say? On the basis of the info in the passage, all of the following options are true. All 4 are true. And what are the options about spiritual material dichotomy of Indian nationalism? So all 4 options are true. Now read except. So what does it mean? 3 are true, 1 is not true. And your job is to pick the one that's not true. Not true about the spiritual material dichotomy of Indian nationalism. Okay, so one of the options is not a feature of the spiritual material dichotomy of Indian nationalism. Now see, here we have the word dichotomy. Okay, by the way, you should definitely add this word in your vocabulary. Anything that, now when you're solving RC questions, you encounter a word that is unfamiliar, especially from the past CAT papers, definitely add it in your vocabulary. So after the session, look up the meaning, look up the pronunciation, look up the sentences, make it a part of your vocabulary. It's a very nice word. See, dichotomy, even if you don't understand, you would have understood by now that it's connected to distinction. Okay, it's very similar to distinction. So dichotomy actually is duality. Okay, whenever you have two opposing things. Okay, so for instance, here you're talking about Indian nationalism. Now there are two opposing aspects of the Indian nationalism, right? There is a spiritual part of it and there is a material part of it, right? So that's the dichotomy. Why is it opposing people? Think about it. Why is the spiritual aspect and material aspect of Indian nationalism opposing? Because in the material aspect, they are imitating the West, but in the spiritual aspect, they're retaining their identity. So the contradictory pulls that the first paragraph spoke about, that is what it was. Okay, so dichotomy is nothing but duality. Okay, and you can look it up and make this a part of your vocabulary. All right, so which one is not an aspect of this? Helped in safeguarding the identity of Indian nationalism. This dichotomy did help in safeguarding the identity of Indian nationalism, right? Because it retained the spiritual essence, and that was the identity. So the dichotomy, the duality, did help in safeguarding the identity. So this is not your answer. Remember, we're picking the one that is not true. Okay. Constituted the premise of the Ghar-Bahir dichotomy. Correct. What is the Ghar-Bahir dichotomy? The inner, outer. This was analogous, right? So it did constitute the premise of the Ghar-Bahir dichotomy. This is not the answer. Okay. Represented a continuation of age-old oppositions in Indian culture. This dichotomy, did it represent a continuation of age-old oppositions in Indian culture? No, it didn't represent a continuation. Nowhere does the passage say that it represents a continuation of age-old oppositions in Indian culture. No, so let's park this. Was not as ideologically powerful as the inner-outer dichotomy. Okay? Was not as, one second, just give me 1 second, okay? I'm getting a little confused. On the basis all of the following are true about the spiritual, okay, was not as ideologically powerful as the inner-outer dichotomy. Okay, let's see that. So we're talking about spiritual material dichotomy, right? Okay, let's go back. Let's see. Yes. So it says the material spiritual distinction was condensed into an analogous but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy. So material spiritual was far more powerful than the outer and inner, is what the author is saying. Okay. Was not as ideological. Following a true. No, this is. Okay, all the following are true. So this helped in safeguarding, constitute the premise of represented a continuation of age-old oppositions in Indian culture. What was not as ideological powerful as the inner-outer dichotomy? It was more powerful, not as ideological powerful. So this is not true, right? So this should be your answer. Hold on a second. Was condensed into an analogous but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy that between the condensed into an analogous but the discourse of the shows of the material spiritual resolution was condensed into an analogous but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy. Okay, got it. I'm misreading the statement. Sorry, folks. Just give me 1 second. Sorry about the confusion. Okay, let's read this. It's an interesting statement. What does it say? The discourse of nationalism shows that the material spiritual distinction was condensed into an analogous means comparable, but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy. So the outer and inner dichotomy, there are two dichotomies here, right? There is, sorry about this, material and spiritual. Okay, there is outer and inner. Okay, there are two dichotomies and the comparison is between them. It says was condensed into an analogous, so they were comparable, but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy, that between the outer and the inner. So the outer and inner was more powerful than the material spiritual. That's what it means. Sorry about that. I made a mistake. So the sentence says the outer and inner ideology was more ideologically powerful than material and spiritual. They were comparable, analogous, but outer and inner was more powerful. Okay, hence this is true for the passage, right? Because the passage says the outer inner was more powerful. This is saying was not as ideologically powerful as the inner outer dichotomy. So this is correct for the passage. This is not our answer. The answer is 3. Okay, sorry about the confusion. All right, let's go on. Question number 4. Which one of the following explains the contradictory polls on Indian nationalism? Okay, we'll run the poll. All right. Okay, great. Oh, this has a big majority. All right. Hopefully, you folks are correct. Option 3, 62%. So that's your first choice. Followed by 14% option 1. That's your second choice, and 11% for 2 and 4. Okay, let's look at this. Which one of the following explains the contradictory pulls on Indian nationalism? I think I kind of gave the answer away when I was explaining the previous question. Sorry about that. Okay, the contradictory pulls are explained in the first paragraph. You can go and reread it. That's what we do with specific questions, right? The answer is in the first paragraph itself. It says, I've elaborated a framework for analyzing the contradictory pulls on Indian nationalist ideology in its struggle against the dominance of colonialism. What are the contradictory pulls that the author is talking about? So move on. Briefly, this resolution was built around a separation. Blah. Okay, that's fine. It was in the material sphere that the claims of Western civilization were the most powerful. To overcome this domination, the colonized people had to learn those superior techniques of organizing material life and incorporate them within their old cultures. But this could mean the imitation of West in every aspect of the life. For then the very distinction between the West and the East would vanish. So what is contradictory? See, the contradiction is that the East is resisting the West. That is the nationalist ideology here, right? According to the passage. They're struggling against the dominance of colonialism. And they want a resolution. They don't want to be dominated or subjugated by the West. But then the contradiction is that they actually end up imitating West when it comes to the material sphere. Okay, so on one aspect they are resisting. On one hand they are resisting, on the other hand they are imitating them. That's the contradiction that the author is talking about in the first paragraph. So the answer is here. Despite its spiritual superiority, Indian nationalism had to fight against colonial domination. This is not the contradiction. This is not the contradiction. Okay, it says despite its spiritual superiority, Indian nationalism had to fight against colonial. This is not the contradiction at all being spoken in the first paragraph. Despite its fight against colonial domination, Indian nationalism had to borrow from the colonizer in the spiritual sphere. This is wrong. Indian nationalism didn't borrow from the colonizer in the spiritual sphere. They borrowed in the material sphere. That's why this looks like the right answer. Despite its scientific and technological inferiority, Indian nationalism had to fight against colonial domination. No, this is not the contradiction. The answer is definitely 3. They were fighting against colonial domination on one hand, they were resisting it. On the other hand, they had to borrow from the colonizer. Okay, so that's the answer. Let's start discussing. Okay, all right. What does it say? Again, abstract. It's an abstract passage, right? So it says many people believe that truth conveys power. All right. Hence, sticking with the truth is the best strategy for gaining power. Unfortunately, this is just a comforting myth. In fact, truth and power have a far more complicated relationship, because in human society, power means two very different things. So the first paragraph says that the general belief, many people believe that truth conveys power. So the best strategy for gaining power is be honest, completely honest, and you will gain power. But the author says this is just a comforting myth. All right. Truth and power, according to the author, have a far more complicated relationship. Why? Because in human society, power means two very different things. And what are those two different things? The author will explain in the next paragraph. Okay, so connect the dots. On the one hand, so that means the author is explaining the first thing. Power means having the ability to manipulate objective realities, to hunt animals, to construct bridges, to cure diseases, to build atom bombs. This kind of power is closely tied to the truth. Okay, so power has two things, right? It says two very different things. 1 and 2 in where? In human society. Okay, so 1, it says ability to manipulate objective realities, and it is closely tied to the truth. The first one is closely tied to the truth. If you believe a false physical theory, you won't be able to build an atom bomb. So very closely tied to truth. On the other hand, transition word, second aspect, power also means having the ability to manipulate human beliefs, thereby getting lots of people to cooperate effectively. Building atom bombs requires not just a good understanding of physics, but also the coordinated labor of millions of humans. Planet Earth was conquered by Homo sapiens rather than by chimpanzees or elephants, because we are the only mammals that can cooperate in very large numbers. Social cooperation and large-scale cooperation depends on believing common stories. But these stories need not be true. Understand, this is where the fiction aspect is coming into picture. You can unite millions of people by making them believe in completely fictional stories about God, about race, or about economics. The dual nature of power and truth results in the curious fact that we humans know many more truths than any other animal, but we also believe in much more nonsense. So the second aspect of power, it's not relying on truth, right? It's relying on fiction. Because and why is that fiction? Why is that fiction coming into picture? Why are these fictional stories about God, about race, or about economics being propagated? Because they want to unite people. Okay, it clearly says you can unite millions of people by making them believe in fictional stories. And the dual nature of power and truth it's obviously dual nature, right? Because here you're not speaking the truth. You're speaking lies, you're speaking fiction. So that's why it becomes dual. It's no longer truth, it's the opposite of truth. And why are they doing it? To unite people. Okay, all right, let's move on. When it comes to uniting people around a common story, so it's carrying on that aspect, fiction actually enjoys 3 inherent advantages over the truth. So fiction has advantages over truth when it comes to uniting people around a common story. Interesting. First, whereas the truth is universal, fictions tend to be local. Consequently, if you want to distinguish a tribe from foreigners, a fictional story will serve as a far better identity marker than a true story. Okay, so truth is universal, fiction is local stories around your tribe, around your group. Okay, second huge advantage of fiction over truth has to do with the handicap principle, which says that reliable signals must be costly to the signaler. Otherwise, they can easily be faked by cheaters. Complicated. If political loyalty is signaled by believing a true story, anyone can fake it, but believing ridiculous and outlandish stories exacts greater cost and is therefore a better signal of loyalty. Okay, so the second one is a little complicated. Some of you might have understood it, some of you not. Okay, but that's fine. Don't get stuck here. Okay, at least what you can gather from this is the example. So what it's saying is that when it comes to loyalty, If you're basing the loyalty on a true story, it can be faked. But basing the loyalty on a ridiculous and outlandish story, think about it. You come up with a ridiculous and outlandish story, and you make people believe them. There's a greater cost there. The loyalty will be stronger because the effort is stronger. It's easy to do it with truth. It's difficult to do it with ridiculous and outlandish stories. Okay, let's move on. Let's not get stuck. What is the third advantage? Third and most important, the truth is often painful and disturbing. Hence, if you stick to unalloyed reality, few people will follow you. An American presidential candidate who tells the American public the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about American history has a 100% guarantee of losing the elections. An uncompromising adherence of the truth is an admirable spiritual practice, but is not a winning political strategy. Okay, so here it's describing the three advantages that fiction has over truth. Okay, right? Those are the three advantages, and we read that. The last part is also interesting. It's saying that truth is third and most important. The truth is often painful. So if you give people the harsh reality, especially as a politician, what does a politician do? If the politician starts speaking the truth, very few people will be able to accept that harsh reality. So there's a politician gives you fake promises, and then that's how people rally around them. So the author says an uncompromising adherence to the truth is an admirable spiritual practice, but is not a winning political strategy. Okay, let's move on. Even if we need to pay some price for deactivating our rational faculties, the advantages of increased social cohesion are often so big that fictional stories routinely triumph over the truth in human history. So social cohesion, okay, or social cooperation is more important. And even if that's coming at the expense of sort of, deactivating our rational faculties. So we kind of like, the price you pay for social cohesion is to believe in fiction. Scholars have known this for thousands of years, which is why scholars often had to decide whether they serve the truth or social harmony. Okay, should they aim to unite people by making sure everyone believes in the same fiction, or should they let people know the truth even at the price of disunity? So again, sort of comparing that, right? We're basically saying that for unity or social cohesion, right, fiction is important. Okay, so if you want to unite people, you need fiction. If you just speak the truth all the time, then it will come at the price of disunity, and social cohesion is more important. All right. Okay. So what is the passage talking about? See, there is of course the discussion of power and truth, right? But is that the main discussion? Think about it. Isn't the focus more on fiction? Right? Isn't the focus more on the fact that, okay, you need fiction to unite people. You need fiction for social cohesion. So this whole aspect of power, truth conveying power is not necessarily true. Okay? Sometimes what you have to do is you have to unite people through fictional stories. So social cohesion comes at that sort of with fiction. And that's why fiction has advantages over truth, and that's why it's used for social cohesion. Okay, so that's the main idea. Let's move on and let's discuss the questions. All right, we'll run the poll now, and you can answer the first question. Okay, all right, the poll is ended. Sorry, I should have given you a 10-second marker. Sorry about that, folks. All right, let's discuss this. Regarding which one of the following quotes could be argued that the author overemphasizes the importance of fiction? Okay, very few votes because we ended it early, but 64% of you have gone for 1. This is your first choice. Okay, and then followed by 2, 3, and 4. All right. So regarding which one of the following quotes could we argue that the author is overemphasizing the importance of fiction? So basically the question is asking in which of the following quotes the author overemphasizes the importance of fiction. The author is clearly giving fiction more importance, right? But which quote overemphasizes it is what the question is asking. Okay, let's read the first quote. These are quotes from the passage. Scholars often had to decide whether they serve the truth or social harmony. Okay, so the choice was between truth or social harmony. Should they aim to unite people by making sure everyone believes in the same fiction, or should they let people know the truth? So what is this quote saying? That fiction gets you unity, always. Okay, and truth gets you disunity. So because it says scholars often have to decide whether they serve the truth or social harmony. So it's making it very absolute. Either truth or social harmony. If you want social harmony, then go with fiction. Right? So look at the way this sentence is constructed. Right? It's very sort of assertive. It's very absolute. It's either or. It's black and white. The author is overemphasizing the importance of fiction here because the author is saying that in a way that fiction will get you unity. And the way the sentence is constructed, fiction will get you unity, like very confidently. That's why there is an overemphasis of fiction here. Okay, let's park this. Second quote, hence sticking with the truth is the best strategy for gaining power. Unfortunately, this is just a comforting myth. Why would you say that the author is overemphasizing the importance of fiction here? The author is simply telling you that truth is not the best strategy for gaining power. Okay, the author is not overemphasizing the importance of fiction here. The author is simply saying truth is not the best strategy for gaining power. Okay, so this is not your answer. In fact, truth and power have a far more complicated relationship because in human society, power means two very different things. There is no emphasis on fiction. Forget overemphasis. On the one hand, power means having the ability to manipulate objective realities, to hunt animals, blah, blah, blah. Again, there is no emphasis on fiction here. We need a quote that overemphasizes the importance of fiction, and that is 1. Okay? Alright, let's go to question 2. We'll run the poll now. Alright, 40% of you have gone for 3. Okay? And then it's split between 2 and 4. And then finally you have 13% who have gone for 1. Alright. The central theme of the passage is about the choice between. Okay? Now what is the central theme first of all? Let's try to identify that. Alright? What is the central theme here, folks? If I were to ask you and tell me in chat, give me the most important keywords from this passage. Okay, forget sentences. Just give me the most important keywords from this passage. Give me the most important ones. Let's start with that. Which keyword do you think is the most important in this passage? Fiction. Okay, Ishika says fiction. I'm just going to write that down. Rohit says truth. Okay. Tariq says power, truth and fiction. So Tariq is adding power here. Truth, power, fiction. Srivats. Pradeep says people's unity. Very nice. Okay, great. So this is what you've given me, right? You've given me fiction, you've given me truth, you've given me power, and you've given me unity. Social cohesion. Sunset says social cohesion. So that is like unity. Okay. Alright, so you've basically given me 4 keywords here. Okay. Out of these 4 keywords, which is the most important one in the passage? Or give me the 2 most important ones. And consider the whole passage. Give me the 2 most important ones out of the 4 listed on the screen. Truth and power. Okay, Srivat says truth and power. Fiction and unity. Interesting. Truth. Fiction and truth. Truth and power. Ria says power. Truth and power. Okay. Alright. Let's talk about this. Now, the passage starts by saying many people believe that truth conveys power. Right? And then the author says this is a comforting myth. Okay, truth and power have a far more complicated relationship. And then they explain explain sort of that relationship. Power means, it says because in human society power means 2 very different things. It explains that. And then the second aspect is more important, right? Because the author says, on the other hand, power also means having the ability to manipulate human beliefs. Okay, thereby getting lots of people to cooperate effectively. And the author carries on that thread. Okay, in the next paragraph also. Here also the author is talking about uniting people around a common story. This paragraph is all about social cohesion and unity and how fiction can unite. Okay, and then here also it ends by still following the whole unity social cohesion aspect. Okay, now think about this. Again, I'm not saying look at the words, the frequency of the words in the passage. No, that is not what we're doing. But I'm just trying to understand the flow of ideas here. It starts with truth and power. Okay, It tells you that truth and power have a far more complicated relationship. Then it says power means two very different things. It explains the first thing. The author doesn't elaborate on that. The author elaborates on the second one. And cooperative, effectively, social cohesion, unity, isn't that the essence of the passage? I would actually argue here, is power even the main idea? Isn't the main idea around social cohesion through fiction? Isn't that the main idea? Yes, I agree that it starts with that. But the main idea of the passage is all about, okay, how do you unite people? And fiction has certain three clear advantages over truth. And then it relates it to the fact that it helps in uniting people. Doesn't it also say something like third and most important? The truth is often painful. Okay, so here in this passage, okay, if I were to look at these four keywords, I would actually argue that unity and social cohesion is very important. Okay, in terms of the theme, fiction is very important in terms of the theme. Okay, let's look at the answer. Central theme of the passage is about the choice between stories that unite people and those that distinguish groups from each other. Stories that unite people and stories that distinguish groups from each other. That's not the choice. That is not connected to the main idea. Okay. Leaders who unknowingly spread fictions and those who intentionally do so. There is no unknowing intentionally mentioned anywhere. Sorry, the poll has been run by mistake. Sorry, folks. There is no unknowingly and intentionally here. Okay, so this is not your answer. Attaining social cohesion and propagating objective truth. Attaining social cohesion and propagating objective truth. The choice is between them, right? Either you choose social cohesion or you choose objective truth. Okay, so this looks like the right answer. Now the confusion can be between 3 and 4. It's very normal. It's a tricky question. The confusion can be between 3 and 4. See, what is the difference between 3 and 4? Ask yourself, whenever you're stuck with two options, how do you break the tie? What is the difference between these two options? The difference is that third talks about social cohesion, fourth does not talk about social cohesion. Now, what you have to decide is social cohesion more important in the passage's main idea, or is power more important? Think about it. Power is not even mentioned. It's mentioned in the beginning, but later on the author doesn't even elaborate on that, right? The author just mentions power in the beginning. But then it changes tracks and talks about fiction and social cohesion. So hence, when you're evaluating these two options, you have to compare social cohesion and power. Which is the central theme? The central theme is around social cohesion. Hence the answer is 3. Okay, it's a tricky one. Okay, let's go to question number 3. We can have the poll now. All right, so 68% of you have gone for 2. Okay, it's a pretty good majority. 22% have gone for 3. Okay, 9% of you have gone for 1 and no takers for 4. Okay, all right. The author implies, okay, inference question, implies that like scholars, successful leaders. Okay, so first of all, we have to understand what do scholars do. Scholars is mentioned in the last paragraph. If you've read effectively, you would get a trigger. You'll go to the last paragraph, reread it, understand what scholars are saying, and then answer the question. Okay, all right. Let's see what the scholars are saying. Even if we need to pay some price, and remember, when you're reading the specific part, don't just read that part. Read a few lines above and below as well for complete context. There's nothing below, so above definitely. Even if we need to pay some price for deactivating our rational faculties, the advantages of increased social cohesion are often so big that fictional stories routinely triumph over the truth in human history. Scholars have known this for thousands of years, which is why scholars often had to decide whether they served the truth or social harmony. So scholars knew this. That's why the scholars often had to decide, okay, should we serve the truth in this situation or should we go for social harmony? That means they always had a choice, and it seemed like they picked one of these choices based on the situation. That's what it looks like, right? Should they aim to unite people by making sure everyone believes in the same fiction, or should they let people know the truth even at the price of disunity? Right? Remember, here it's a choice. Scholars often had to decide. So here we can infer they chose either or depending on the situation. It doesn't say that they always went for social harmony. They just had the choice and they had to decide which one to pick. Okay, that's what the scholars did. So keep that in mind. Now, author implies that like scholars, successful leaders today know how to create social cohesion better than in the past. There is no today and past comparison, right? There's no present and past comparison. Not the answer. Know how to balance truth and social unity. They have the choice. We can infer that depending on the situation, they picked either or. So what were they doing? Balancing truth and social unity. Park it. Need to leverage both types of power to remain in office. No, scholars are not connected with the types of power. Okay, so this is not the answer. Use myths to attain the first type of power. Nope. Nope. Okay, the answer is definitely the balance between truth and social unity. Okay, so this is your correct answer. All right, let's do the last question. Let's run the poll. All right, we'll have the results. Yeah. Oh wow, it's split. Okay. All right. 1 and 2 are your first two choices. Very equal percentages, 30%. Okay, so this is first choice. This is also your first choice. Then 20%. Oh, it's completely split. Okay. So this question did confuse you. Okay, let's see this. The author would support none of the following statements about political power except that. Okay. Now this is a confusing question. This is a double negative. Okay, be careful of this. This has become very common in CAT lately for the past 2 years. You most likely would see this in 22 as well. See, double negatives, you don't have to get confused. Follow the same thing. Don't read except. Don't read except first. Just read without except. It will become very clear. Let's do that. The author would support none of the following statements about political power. That means the author would support none of these options. That's what it means, right? The author would support none of the 4 options. Now there is an except. So what does it mean? 3, the author will not support. 1, the author will support. Correct? So if you break it down, it becomes easier. So first you start with none. Okay? 4. The author will not support all 4 of them. Except -1 equal to 3. So 3 do not support, 1 support. Okay? What is our job? We have to pick the one that the author would support. Okay? Alright. So while unalloyed truth is not recommended, leaders should stay as close to I'm blabbering. It typically happens when I start to get exhausted. Sorry about that. While unalloyed truth is not recommended, leaders should stay as close as possible to it. Does the author say that leaders should stay as close as possible to truth? You can go back and read the line. The author says that absolute truth, objective truth is great spiritually, but it's not a great political strategy. It's not a winning political strategy. So author is saying truth is not going to help you win. So here the option says while unalloyed truth means untouched truth, absolute truth. Leaders should stay as close as possible to it. The author doesn't say that. Okay, the author doesn't say that. So the author does not support it. We have to pick the one that author supports. So this is not your answer. Okay. People cannot handle the unvarnished truth. So leaders retain power from deviating from it. That is what the author is saying. The author is saying the winning political strategy is to deviate from truth. Go back and read it. You'll understand it. And that's because people can't handle it. It's mentioned in connection with that. So people cannot handle the unvarnished truth. So leaders retain power from detaining from it. This the author would support. This looks like an answer. There are definite advantages to promoting fiction, but there needs to be some limit to a pervasive belief in myths. The author doesn't talk about this. Okay, it says advantages to promoting fiction, yes. But the author doesn't say there needs to be some limit to a pervasive belief in myths. The author doesn't mention that anywhere. Okay, this is not your answer. Manipulating people's beliefs is politically advantageous, but a leader who propagates only myths is likely to lose power. Nope, the author doesn't say that. Not at all. The author in fact says deviate. That's the winning political strategy. So the author would not support it. The only one that the author would support is number 2, and hence that's your answer. Okay. I think what must have happened is quite a few of you got confused because of the construction of the question. So now you know how to handle double negatives. Anyway, in case of except, read it without except, then go to except. Okay? All right, people. I will go paragraph by paragraph, extract the main point, and then finally, I will extract the main idea. Okay? Let's start discussing this. What does it say? It has been said that knowledge or the problem of knowledge is the scandal of philosophy. Okay, now it's a philosophy passage. Now, personally, I don't enjoy philosophy. Okay, it's one of my weak areas. But see, this is where effective reading comes into picture. Now, there are a number of effective reading strategies, right? The first one is that you should read whatever is thrown at you, irrespective of the topic. Okay, be an active and aggressive reader. So tell yourself before beginning the passage that no matter what the topic, you will read it with a lot of energy, interest, and enthusiasm. Okay, and that is something that I'm going to tell myself because I don't like philosophy for this passage. Alright? Okay, let's start. It has been said that knowledge or the problem of knowledge is the scandal of philosophy. The scandal is philosophy's apparent inability to show how, when, and why we can be sure that we know something or indeed that we know anything. Very interesting actually, think about it. Okay, so the author talks about the scandal of philosophy and then the author explains what the scandal of philosophy is. Right? Apparent inability to show how, when, and why we can be sure that we know something or indeed that we know anything. Let's continue. Philosopher Michael Williams writes, is it possible to obtain knowledge at all? This problem is pressing because there are powerful arguments, some very ancient, for the conclusion that it is not. Now it's obviously it's philosophy, right? So it's some sort of random weird idea. So what this paragraph till now is saying is it's questioning whether it's possible to obtain knowledge. Right? Now obviously it's going to take you a while to understand this, unless you're from a philosophy background. Because we assume that knowledge is something that we acquire on a daily basis. I mean today also we're trying to acquire knowledge. But it's questioning that. The scandal of philosophy is questioning whether it's even possible to obtain knowledge. Okay, let's continue. Now, that's not. Skepticism is the skeleton in Western rationalism's closet. While it is not clear whether scandal matters to anyone but philosophers, philosophers point out that it should matter to everyone, at least given a certain conception of knowledge. Let's continue. For, they explain, unless we can ground our claims to knowledge as such, which is to say distinguish it from mere opinion, superstition, fantasy, wishful thinking, ideology, illusion or delusion, then the actions we take on the basis of presumed knowledge, boarding an airplane, swallowing a pill, finding something guilty of a crime, will be irrational and unjustified. Okay, now we're done reading this passage, this paragraph. Okay, it's a pretty long paragraph. Let's try to extract the main point of this paragraph. This is what you should be doing. Right? After every paragraph, pause and talk to yourself. What is the main point? If you want, you can even make a quick note. Now, what's the main point in this paragraph? Of course, it talks about the scandal of philosophy. What is the scandal of philosophy? Philosophy's inability to sort of confirm or to tell us whether it's possible to acquire knowledge. And then the author says that this is a question that should matter to everyone. Because if it's not possible to acquire knowledge, then all the actions that we take based on knowledge will become unjustified. Right? We're taking actions based on knowledge, and it gives you those examples. Right? It says boarding an airplane, swallowing a pill. Why do you swallow a pill? Because there is a disease. So that's knowledge. Now, if it's not possible to obtain knowledge, then your actions will become irrational and unjustified. That's the main point of this paragraph. Okay, so extract it in your head and then move on. It will help you to maintain the flow of the passage. Let's move on. Now, that is all quite serious sounding, but so also are the rattlings of the skeleton. That is the skeptic's contention that we cannot be sure that we know anything. At least not if we think of knowledge as something like having a correct mental representation of reality, and not if we think of reality as something like things. Okay, it's a long sentence, let's break it down. So what is it saying? It's talking about the skeptic, right? It mentions skeptic in the first paragraph as well. So what's a skeptic? A skeptic is somebody who doubts something. So here, a skeptic's contention, okay, or a skeptic's argument is that we cannot be sure that we know anything, connected to whether it's possible to obtain knowledge. Because if it's not possible to obtain knowledge, that means we don't know anything. That's what the skeptic is saying. Okay? Alright. Now, what does the skeptic say in detail? Skeptic's contention that we cannot be sure that we know anything, at least not if we think of knowledge as something like having a correct mental representation of reality. If we define knowledge like that, let's say if we define knowledge as having a correct mental representation of reality, then the skeptic says that we cannot be sure that we know it. Why? Because reality as something like things as they are in themselves, independent of our perceptions, ideas or descriptions. So the skeptic is defining reality like this. If you define reality as something like things as they are in themselves, independent of our perceptions, okay? So of course we perceive everything and then we create a reality based on our perceptions. But let's say if reality is agnostic of our perceptions, then the skeptic says we can't be sure that we know it. Okay, let's continue. For the skeptic will note, since reality under that conception of it is outside our ken, we cannot catch a glimpse of things in themselves around the corner of our own eyes. We cannot form an idea of reality that floats above the processor of our conceiving it. If we don't have perception, okay, try to understand this, try to simplify this. What does the skeptic say? The skeptic is saying that if you remove perceptions of reality, then maybe we don't understand anything. Right? Reality independent of our perceptions is something that we don't understand, because everything for us is based on perceptions. So that's what the author is trying to say. Okay? We have no way to compare our mental representations with things as they are in themselves, and therefore no way to determine whether they are correct or incorrect. We say that knowledge is a mental representation of reality. If we consider reality as independent of our perceptions, then we cannot confirm that our mental representation is correct or not. Right? Think about this. So we are talking about reality here. Okay? It's definitely twisted. Okay? In the passage is twisted, but we'll attempt to understand it. This is reality. Our reality is dependent on perceptions. We perceive something and then we create a mental representation of that, and that constitutes as knowledge. Okay? What the author is saying is, or what the skeptic says here is, if you consider reality as independent of perceptions, right, then how do you know what you're thinking is correct or not? Reality is independent of our perceptions. Then the mental representation that you're creating, you have no way of confirming whether that's correct or incorrect. That's what the author is trying to say. Okay? Alright, let's continue. Thus the skeptic may repeat, rattling loudly, you cannot be sure you know something or anything at all. At least not, he may add, rattling softly before disappearing, if that is the way you conceive knowledge. So again, the author is coming back to that point. That it's not possible, maybe the skeptic says it's not possible to obtain knowledge if you consider reality as independent of perceptions. Okay? Let's continue. There are a number of ways to handle this situation, this standard of philosophy. The most common is to ignore it. Okay? That's what the author is saying. Most people outside the academy, and indeed most of us inside it, are unaware of or unperturbed by the philosophical standard of knowledge and go about our lives without too many epistemic anxieties. So the author is saying maybe the way to ignore, the way to handle this situation, and it's a precarious situation, right? Think about it. If let's say you start thinking, oh, is it possible to obtain knowledge? It's sort of like a quite a startling situation. So the author is saying one of the ways to handle the situation is possibly to ignore it, which is what many people do. Let's continue. We hold our beliefs and presumptive knowledges more or less confidently, usually depending on how we acquire it. I saw it with my own eyes, I heard it on Fox News, a guy at the office told me. So the source of that information. Okay, based on the source, we say that our knowledge is correct, depending on where we got it from. and how broadly and strenuously they seem to be shared or endorsed by various relevant people, experts and authorities, friends and family members, colleagues and associates. Okay, so we have known this problem. Okay, and then the author says most of the time we are confident of our knowledge. And how are we confident? Based on the source of the information and how widely it has been shared. And shared by who? Let's say if it's been shared by a credible source according to us, then we are confident of that knowledge. Or if it's shared widely, we believe in it. So those are the things. So we are confident of it, this problem doesn't seem to perturb us. And we examine our convictions more or less closely, explain them more or less extensively, and defend them more or less vigorously, usually depending on what seems to be at stake for ourselves and on other people, and what resources are available for reassuring ourselves or making our beliefs credible to others. Look, it's right here on the page, add up the figures yourself, I happen to be a hard specialist. So then the author says that we defend this. We say that we have knowledge, we are confident about it, and we often defend it depending on what's at stake, for us or for others. Okay? So this paragraph, of course, this paragraph talks about ignoring this scandal of philosophy, and the author says many of us do this already. We are confident of our knowledge based on the source and how widely it is shared, and also we defend it depending what's at stake. Okay? Alright, now see, it's philosophy, right? It definitely goes around in circles. It's very abstract. If you're not used to philosophical material, you would find this complex. So that's why I always say, if you're, let's say for instance, I don't like philosophy, I'm not comfortable with it, I force myself to read it. And that's the way to get better. Okay? So let's extract the main idea here. What is the main idea of this passage? Definitely the passage is talking about the scandal of philosophy. What is the scandal of philosophy? Whether it is possible to acquire knowledge at all. Okay? Is it possible to acquire knowledge? That's the scandal of philosophy. Okay? Then, the author here says is that the skeptic, okay, the person who doubts this, if you consider reality as independent of our perceptions, then the skeptic says we have no way to confirm whether our knowledge is correct or not. And then finally, the author ends by saying that a way to handle the situation is to ignore it, and that's what most of us do, right? So we ignore it, we are very confident of our knowledge based on the source and how widely it has been shared. That's also something that the author says, and we also defend it vigorously, depending what's at stake. That's the main idea of this article. Okay, we've extracted it. Let's go to the questions now. Often what happens is when the passage is complex, the questions turn out to be manageable. Okay, so we can hope that in this case the questions were manageable. Let's see. Alright? Okay. Now, how we're going to solve this question is, I'll show you the question and then we'll run a poll on YouTube. Okay? So you can answer the question in the poll itself. Don't type it in chat. Okay, just answer the poll and then we'll discuss it. The question says the author of the passage is most likely to support which one of the following statements. So it's an inference question. Okay? So based on what you've understood from the passage, answer this question, read all the options carefully and answer in the poll. Then we'll discuss it. Alright, now question. So there is a significant majority here, 68% of you have chosen option 3. Okay? So this is your first choice. 28% of you have chosen option 2. Alright, and then there are few takers for 1 and 4. In fact, no takers for 4. Okay, let's discuss this question, people. The author of the passage is most likely to support which of the following statements. Now, one thing that I always say is when you have read the passage, before you come to the questions, extract the main idea, just as I did. Okay, let's start answering the questions. 1. The confidence with which we maintain something to be true is usually independent of the source of the alleged truth. Understand this option. The confidence with which we maintain something to be true, that means knowledge, is usually independent of the source of the alleged truth. Now this is opposite to what the author said in the passage. And we discussed that. In fact, in the second paragraph, I think, when the author was discussing, or third paragraph rather, the problem, ignore it. The author said we're very confident of the knowledge. And how are we confident of the knowledge? Based on the source and how widely it's shared. So it's actually opposite to what the author is saying. So the author is not going to support this. This can't be an answer. It's in the third paragraph. We will go back and check it. Okay? Let's look at number 2, which is the second choice. The actions taken on the basis of presumed knowledge are rational and justifiable if we are confident that the knowledge is widely held. Okay, let's try to understand this option. The actions taken on the basis of presumed knowledge are rational and justifiable if we are confident that the knowledge is widely held. The author in the third paragraph talks about this, right? What happens when we are confident of the knowledge when we are confident that the knowledge is widely held? The author's point is that we are usually confident of our knowledge based on what? Source and how widely it is shared and by whom it is shared. It just makes that confident. Now this option is linking actions to that. The option is saying actions are rational and justifiable if we are confident that knowledge is widely held. There is no connection like that in the passage. Okay? Think about this. This first part of this option, the actions taken on the basis of presumed knowledge, is something which is spoken about in the first paragraph. Okay? Where does it say that? For they explain, unless we can ground our claims to knowledge as such, okay, blah blah blah, then the actions we take on the basis of presumed knowledge will be irrational and unjustifiable. The author in the first paragraph talks about that, the actions. The author says that they will be irrational and unjustifiable if we cannot prove that we can obtain knowledge. That's what the author is saying in the first paragraph. The third paragraph, right, talks about that we are confident of knowledge based on how widely it is shared. There is no connection between these 2 points in the passage. These are independent points that the author is making. The author doesn't strike a connection between actions and our confidence. So this is not the right answer. It's a tricky one because the option uses words directly from the passage. Okay, but there is no connection that the author establishes between these 2 points. Alright, let's go to the third one, which was your first choice. The scandal of philosophy is that we might not know anything at all about reality if we think of reality as independent of our perceptions, ideas, or descriptions. Yes, beautiful. This is what the author says. Right? And it is connected to the main idea. The main idea is about scandal of philosophy. Right? So the author would be supportive of this. Let's park this. For the skeptic, if we think of reality as independent of our perceptions, ideas, or descriptions, we should aim to know that reality independently too. Okay, think about this. For the skeptic, if we think of reality as independent of our perceptions, ideas, or descriptions, we should aim to know that reality independently too. The skeptic doesn't say that. All the skeptic says is that if reality is independent of our perceptions, then we can't be sure of our knowledge, is what the skeptic is saying. The skeptic doesn't say that we should aim to know that reality independently too. Number one, and is this even possible? This part, is it even possible? If reality is devoid of our perceptions, is it even possible to know reality? Is what the skeptic is questioning. So this is not the answer. The correct answer is definitely 3. Okay, so well done. Most of you got it. So well done on that. But yeah, sort of a tricky question. But if you sort of understand the main idea of this passage, you will be able to answer this question. Although it's not a main idea question, but if you understood the main idea of the scandal of philosophy, you would have been able to answer this question. Okay, let's go to question 2. Alright, have a look at this question. We'll run the poll and we'll discuss it. Go for it, folks. Okay, yes, so there is a majority here in this as well. 62% of you have chosen option 2. Okay, and then it's split 12% for the remaining 3 options. Okay, let's look at this. Now it says, we cannot catch a glimpse of things in themselves around the corner of our own eyes. We cannot form an idea of reality that floats above the process of our conceiving it. And it's in double quotes. So what does that mean? That is mentioned in the passage. Which one of the following statements best reflects the argument being made in this sentence? Okay, Okay, now please understand this is an example of a specific question because it's pertaining to a specific portion in the passage. Now, such questions tend to be more manageable than general questions because see, if you understood this part, you would be able to answer this question rather than a general question which pertains to the whole passage. That they seem to be more complicated. Sometimes these specific questions are more manageable, so keep that in mind. But for a specific question, you should always go back to the passage and read this line from the passage. And not only this part, sentences above it, sentences below it. Only then you will understand the complete context then. Don't just stick to this. Okay, go back to the passage, what's above, what's below, you have to reread that, understand it and then answer the question. Okay, so let's go back to the passage and do that. Where was this line? In the second paragraph, is that correct? Right, I think it was in the brackets, right? Oh, but yeah. Okay, let's see. So this part. Okay, just give me 1 second. We cannot catch a glimpse of things in themselves around the corner of our own eyes. We cannot form an idea of reality that floats above the processes of our conceiving it. Okay? So let's read the sentences above it and below it and let's try to understand what the sentence means. Okay? For the skeptic will note, since reality under that conception of it is outside the ken. We cannot catch a glimpse of things in themselves around the corner of our own eyes. We cannot form an idea of reality that floats above the processes of our conceiving it. We have no way to compare our mental representations with things as they are in themselves. Okay. Here you should read the lines above this as well because the whole thing is connected. Okay. What was happening in this paragraph? In this paragraph, if you remember, the skeptic said that if you consider knowledge as a mental representation of reality, and if you consider reality as independent of our perceptions, then it's questionable whether we know anything or not. Remember that, okay? It said if reality is independent of our perceptions, then do we even have the correct mental representation of reality? That was the main point in this paragraph. Okay? And specifically this sentence says, we cannot catch a glimpse of things in themselves. So, in themselves means if we consider reality as independent of our perceptions. So then we won't be able to understand reality. Around the corner of our own eyes, we cannot form an idea of reality that floats above the process of our conceiving it. If we don't conceive it, if we don't perceive it, then it's not possible to understand reality. Is what the sentences say. Okay? So understand it in full context and let's try to now solve the question. Okay, what is the first option? Which one of the following statements best reflects the argument being made in the sentence? 1. Our knowledge of reality cannot be merged with our process of conceiving it. Our knowledge of reality cannot be merged with our process of conceiving it. Is that what the sentence is saying? No. It's not talking about merging our knowledge of reality with our process of conceiving it. It's all connected to reality being independent of our perceptions. Okay? So this is not the answer. If the reality of things is independent of our perception, logically we cannot perceive that reality. It's what this sentence is saying, especially in this part. We cannot form an idea of reality that floats above the process of conceiving it. Okay? If the reality is independent of perception, we cannot perceive that reality. This seems to be the right answer. Let's park it. We're parking it because we haven't looked at 3 and 4. If the reality of things is independent of our eyesight, where did eyesight come from? Logically, we cannot perceive our perception. This is twisted. This option is completely absurd. Okay? There is no connection to eyesight. Perception is not connected to eyesight. Okay? And logically, we cannot perceive our perception. It doesn't make sense. This is not the right answer. Our knowledge of reality floats above our subjective perception of it. Now, what this option is doing is, it's trying to trick you. Because here it says, reality that floats above the processes of our conceiving it. What this means is, reality is independent of perception. This is literally taking it and giving you some twisted option which doesn't make any sense at all. So the answer is definitely 2. Okay? Alright folks, I hope this is clear. Let's go to the third question. The poll will be up. Have a look at it. This is also a specific question. Okay, so go back, reread it and answer the question. Okay. Alright, now yeah, so this question looks like it confused you because there is not a significant majority. So let's discuss it. 45% of you said 4. This was your first option. Okay. Then 27% of you chose 1. Second option or second choice. 22% of you said 2. Okay. And then the final one is 3. Okay. Let's look at this. Now in this question, they have thrown all of the options listed here. It makes the question trickier, right? So sometimes you will get this, all of the above, none of these. So those questions tend to be more tricky, obviously. And here what they've done is usually all of the above will be the fourth option. They put it in the first option itself. So be conscious of that. Read the questions and options very carefully. Let's discuss it. Again, a specific question. According to the last paragraph of the passage, we hold our beliefs and presumptive knowledge more or less confidently, usually depending on the quotes in something. Which one of the following most broadly captures what we depend on? Okay, so we're confident about our knowledge. We discussed that, the third paragraph, right? We're confident about our knowledge, and that confidence is coming from where? That confidence is dependent on what? It's dependent on the source, and it's dependent on how widely that knowledge is shared, and by whom. That's what the paragraph said, right? Do you agree? Can you tell me in chat? It says, most of us decided blah blah blah. We hold our beliefs and presumptive knowledge more or less confidently, usually depending on how we acquired them, source, and how broadly and strenuously they seem to be shared or endorsed by various relevant people, experts and authorities, friends and family members, colleagues and associates. So it's dependent on two aspects, isn't it? Source and how widely it's shared and by whom. Is that correct? Then of course it goes on to say, and we examine our convictions more or less closely, explain them, blah blah blah. But this is a separate point. The dependency ends there on two aspects, broadly. Let's go back. Okay. Which one of the following most broadly captures what we depend on? All of the options listed here. Of course, we'll have to park this. We'll come back to it. Number 2. How much of a stake we have in them, what resources there are to support them. This doesn't seem to capture that, right? We just discussed source and how widely it's shared. This doesn't seem to capture it. Doesn't look like the right answer. Let's go to number 3. Dependent on remaining outside the academy, ignoring epistemic anxieties. How is this dependent on remaining outside the academy or ignoring epistemic anxieties? Yes, it is mentioned in the same paragraph, but that's a different point, right? The ignoring part comes in when the author says that how do you address this situation? This whole scandal of philosophy by ignoring it. That's what the author says. And then the author says most of us ignore it, whether we are in the academy or outside the academy. But it's not connected to this part. Those are different points in the same paragraph. Okay? Doesn't look like the right answer. How we come to hold them and how widely they are held in our social circles. Friends, family, colleagues are social circles. How we come to hold them is connected to source. This is what we just discussed. Okay? Now this is not your answer. 3 is not your answer. So that means 1 cannot be your answer. Okay? Now we're left with 2 and 4. 2 didn't seem to be the right answer. So the correct answer is 4. Now the problem with this question is, it borrows points, these different options borrows points from the same paragraph. But the paragraph has multiple points. Okay, so don't get confused. The dependent part is on 2 aspects, which is mentioned in 4. Last question for this passage. The author discusses all of the following arguments in the passage except. Now this is a broad question. Okay, because this is what I meant, broad versus specific. Okay, this is a broad question. The argument can come from anywhere in the passage. And this can be inferences also. So solve this question, the poll will be up any minute. And the poll is up. Okay, it's quite split. Okay, it's a tricky question. Okay, so I'm not surprised if it's split. If you get this wrong, don't beat yourself up about it. Okay, just understand where you went wrong. That's most important. It's a tricky one. I expected this. Very split. 29% of you are saying 2 on 4. Okay, so this is your first choice. This is also your first choice. Equal. 29%. 25% of you are saying 3. Very close. And then finally, you have about 16% of you choosing 1. Okay. Alright, let's understand this question. Alright, the author discusses all of the following arguments in the passage except. It's a broad question. As I said, broad questions tend to be trickier than specific questions. Now, this is not a rule. Okay, this is just a guideline. You can keep this guideline in mind when you're selecting questions, but this will not always be the case. Okay, alright. If we cannot distinguish knowledge from opinion or delusion, we will not be able to justify actions. Now remember, before that, I hope you read this. Okay, so the best way to solve these questions if they confuse you is, first read the question without except. The author discusses all of the following arguments in the passage. Okay, now you read except. That means there are 3 arguments that the author discusses in the passage. 1 the author does not discuss. We have to pick the option that the author does not discuss. Right? Okay. If we cannot distinguish knowledge from opinion or delusion, we will not be able to justify our actions. Does the author discuss this? First paragraph. The author says that. Right? In the first paragraph, the author clearly says this one. Our actions will be irrational and unjustifiable. Okay? Unless we can ground our claims to knowledge as such. So the author and distinguish it from mere opinion, superstition, fantasy. Right? So if you are not able to differentiate or distinguish your knowledge from opinion, superstition, fantasy, wishful thinking, blah blah blah, then your action will be irrational and unjustifiable. That's what it's saying. That we will not be able to justify our actions if we can't distinguish knowledge from opinion or delusion. The author says that in the paragraph. The question asks except. This is not the right answer. The best way to deal with skepticism about the veracity of knowledge is to ignore it. This was your top choice. I hope it's correct. Let's see. What does veracity mean? Now, if you don't know this, add this to your vocabulary today. See, the thing with vocabulary is if there is an unfamiliar word in the passage, you can understand it from context. But if the unfamiliar word comes in the option, then it becomes tricky. If you don't know, then it becomes difficult. Right? So, veracity means accuracy, authenticity. So, accuracy of knowledge. Okay? The best way to deal with skepticism about the veracity of knowledge is to ignore it. The author does say that, right? That the way to deal with this is to ignore it. Read the option very carefully. Does the author say it's the best way? Let's look at that. There are a number of ways to handle this situation. The most common is to ignore it. The author says the most common way is to ignore it. The option says best. Are these the same? No. See, this is now the tricky. This is very common in fact. The passage will have a certain sort of author's opinion. Okay? But the question setter, what the question setter does is, it picks words from the passage. But one word there will change it. The author doesn't say this is the best way. The author says this is the most common way. But the option says best way. That's not the same. And the option tricked you. And Ankit said that it seems convincing. I'll tell you why it seems convincing. Because it borrowed words from the passage. Any option that borrows words from the passage seems convincing. So you have to be very, very careful about these words. Read the option very carefully. And then go back and confirm it. Right? You will know where that information is. You go back and quickly check. Did the author say best? No, the author said most common. That's not the answer. Okay? It's a tricky one. Number 3. Philosophers maintain that scandal of philosophy should be of concern to everyone. Correct? You see that? Sorry. Correct. What am I saying? I'm sorry, folks. Sorry about this. It's except, right? So this is not an answer. This is not your answer because this is mentioned in the passage. This is not mentioned in the passage. This is the correct answer. Yes, you're right. Sorry. You guys are right. So this is not mentioned in the passage. This is the correct answer. Okay. Philosophers maintain that the standard of philosophy should be of concern to everyone. This is mentioned in the passage. This can't be the answer. Remember, we're looking for except. Skeptics believe that we can never fully know anything. If by knowing we mean knowledge of a reality that is independent of the knower. Correct. This is mentioned in the passage. This can't be the answer. The answer is definitely 2. Okay. So 29% of you, and Ankit, you were right. Okay. It is correct. The problem is best. It's not mentioned in the passage. So that's why it's your answer. Okay. It's easy to forget that most of the world's languages are still transmitted orally with no widely established written form. Okay. While speech communities are increasingly involved in projects to protect their languages in print, on air, and online, orality is fragile and contributes to linguistic vulnerability. Okay. But indigenous languages are about much more than usual words and Euclidean grammar. They function as beacons for the transmission of cultural traditions, environmental understandings, and knowledge about medicinal plants, all at risk when elders die and livelihoods are disrupted. What is the main point in this paragraph? It's talking about a threat, a certain threat to languages. Right? It says that speech communities are increasingly involved to protect their languages. But it seems like these languages are getting lost. Okay, in the end it also says the languages are at risk when elders die and livelihoods are disrupted. Okay, so disappearance of languages is what the main point is in the first paragraph. And how that languages are transmitted orally and that contributes to their fragility, like they become fragile, right? They disappear. And also it makes them increasingly vulnerable. So the main point is definitely the vulnerability and fragility and disappearance of languages because they are in oral form. That's the main point. Don't get stuck on details. Let's move on. Both push and pull factors lead to the decline of languages. There you go. It's connected. Okay, that idea is emerging, right? This also spoke about that. Disappearance, decline of languages. Second paragraph continues. Both push and pull factors lead to the decline of languages. Now we don't know what push and pull factors is. Don't get stuck here. Continue. Just extract the main point. Through war, famine, and natural disasters, whole communities can be destroyed, taking the language with them to the grave, such as the indigenous populations of Tasmania who were wiped out by colonists. Okay, so war happens, famine happens, or natural disasters happen, communities disappear, and languages also disappear with them. Okay? More commonly, speakers live on but abandon their language in favor of another vernacular. A widespread process that linguists refer to as language shift, from which few languages are immune. Okay, what does it say? More commonly, speakers live on but abandon their language. So speakers are abandoning their language on their own. Okay, one is war, famine, and natural disasters. People die, languages die. Sometimes people live and they seem to be giving up on languages. Let's understand why. Such trading up and out of a speech form occurs for complex political, cultural, and economic reasons. Sometimes voluntary, okay, for economic and educational reasons, although often amplified by state coercion or neglect. So sometimes people voluntarily give up their languages, sometimes the government forces them. Okay? Welsh, long stigmatized and disparaged by the British state, has rebounded with vigor. What is the main point here? Okay, it talks about decline of languages and the reasons for decline. The main point here is why are languages declining or why do languages decline? The paragraph gives you a number of reasons. Famine, war, natural disasters, people voluntarily giving up, government coercion, all of that. So this paragraph focuses on reasons. That's the main point. Extract that, move on. Don't get stuck on details. Many speakers of endangered, poorly documented languages have embraced new digital media with excitement. Speakers of endangered, poorly documented languages. Okay. Speakers of previously exclusively oral tongues are turning to the web as a virtual space for languages to live on. Remember, orality of languages make them vulnerable. So these people, to protect their languages, they're turning to the web. Internet technology offers powerful ways for oral traditions and cultural practices to survive, even thrive among increasingly mobile communities. I have watched as videos of traditional wedding ceremonies and songs are recorded on smartphones in London by Nepali migrants, then uploaded to YouTube and watched an hour later by relatives in remote Himalayan villages. What is this? This is an example. Beautiful. When authors give examples, they try to make the point clear. It's good. Okay? So what does this paragraph say? This paragraph talks about how these speakers of endangered languages are turning to the web to protect the languages. Okay? To prevent them from dying. That's the main point. Let's move on. Globalization is regularly and often uncritically pilloried as a major threat to linguistic diversity. Now, pilloried, we don't know what pilloried means. Don't worry about it. Don't get stuck. You can understand pilloried from context. Even if you don't understand, don't get stuck on words. Okay? Globalization is regularly and often uncritically pilloried as a major threat to linguistic diversity. Even if you don't understand pilloried, it's saying that globalization is often positioned as a major threat to linguistic diversity. Right? But in fact, globalization is as much process as it is ideology, certainly when it comes to language. The real forces behind cultural homogenization are unbending beliefs, exchanged through a globalized delivery system, reinforced by the historical monolingualism prevalent in much of the West. So it's basically talking about that globalization is often projected as a threat, okay, to linguistic diversity. But the author says that the real reason is something different. The real reason is monolingualism. Let's continue. Monolingualism, now the author defines that. The condition of being able to speak only one language is regularly accompanied by a deep-seated conviction in the value of that language over all others. English, for example. Across the largest economies that make up the G8, being monolingual is still often the norm, with multilingualism appearing unusual and even somewhat exotic. You can think of an example of America, English, right? The monolingual mindset stands in sharp contrast to the lived reality of most of the world, which throughout its history has been more multilingual than unilingual. Monolingualism, then not globalization, should be a primary concern. Connected to the previous paragraphs, the author says globalization is not the problem, or not the major problem. The major problem is monolingualism. These countries insisting that their language is better than other languages. Okay, or refusing to sort of incorporate multilingualism. Right? Let's move on. Multilingualism can help us live in a more connected and more interdependent world. By widening access to technology, globalization can support indigenous and scholarly communities engaged in documenting and protecting our shared linguistic heritage. For the last 5,000 years, the rise and fall of languages were intimately tied to the prose, sword, and book. In a digital age, the keyboard, screen, and web will play a decisive role in shaping the future linguistic diversity of our species. So it basically talks about monolingualism being a threat and being a problem, and the author says multilingualism is great, it has its advantages, and then it connects it to the web, right? That the web will play a decisive role in shaping the future linguistic diversity of our species, multilingualism, multiple languages. Okay, so what's the main idea here? Think about it. Of course, the passage is talking about languages, but that's not enough. What are the main points in this passage? The passage definitely talks about decline of languages and disappearance of languages, right? Then it talks about the reasons. Why do languages disappear? And then it gives you different reasons, right? And then the author says that globalization is considered as a threat, whereas in fact monolingualism is the major threat to declining languages and to linguistic diversity. And then the author talks about multilingualism. Okay, so the main points are definitely declining languages, the reasons behind that, and how monolingualism is the major threat and not globalization. Those are the main points. Okay, number one, from the passage we can infer that the author is in favor of what? Okay, the poll will be up, you can answer the question there. 75% of you have chosen 4. This is your first option. Okay, followed by 18% on 3, and then few takers for 1 and 2. Let's look at this quickly. For the passage, we can infer that the author is in favor of what? Language shifts across languages. Now, if you go back, you understand that language shift, okay, is when a person moves from their language to another language. Okay, and that happens due to many reasons. The author points that out, right? Sometimes voluntarily, sometimes due to state coercion. The author is not in favor of that. We cannot infer that. Okay, the author in fact talks about how the state, the government forces people to do a language shift. The author is not in favor of that. That's not the answer. Okay? So, is the author in favor of cultural homogenization? Absolutely not. Cultural homogenization, okay, is the problem that the author points out. The author says that globalization is not the issue. The issue is monolingualism. That happens due to cultural homogenization. The author is not in favor of that. An expanded state role in the preservation of languages. Is the author in favor of an expanded state role? Does the author say that government should play a bigger role in preserving languages? No. The author only says that government, in some cases, government puts force or forcefully makes people make a language shift through state coercion. The author is not in favor of the government playing a role in preservation of languages. That's not indicated anywhere. Greater multilingualism? Absolutely. If you go back and read the paragraph, the author is clearly in favor of more multilingualism, greater multilingualism. So that's your answer. Okay? Let's move on. Question 2. Go for it. 68% of you have chosen 1. Okay? 26% of you have chosen 2, and few takers for 3 and 4. Let's look at this. The author lists all of the following as reasons for the decline or disappearance of a language except. Again, you can read it without except. All of the following as reasons for the decline or disappearance of language. Except. That means 3 reasons are mentioned. 1 option is not mentioned by the author. You have to pick the option that is not mentioned. Number 1. The focus on only a few languages as a result of widespread internet use. Does the author say that languages are declining or disappearing because of widespread internet use? Absolutely not. The author in fact says that internet is good. People are using the internet to protect their languages. In the last paragraph, the author also says web can play a pivotal role in multilingualism. This is your answer. Okay? Alright. Governments promoting certain languages over others. This is a problem. This is the reason that the author mentions. State coercion. Okay? So this is can't be your answer. People shifting away from their own language to study or work in another language. Language shift happens voluntarily due to educational or financial reasons. Correct? A catastrophic event that entirely eliminates the people and their culture. A natural disaster, a war, famine, these are all catastrophic events. A catastrophe is an event that causes major destruction. The author gives you that example, and the answer is definitely 1. Okay, let's move on. The author mentions the Welsh language to show that. Okay, very specific question. So go back and read that line and try to understand why the author has used the Welsh language. Okay, we'll start the poll now. Okay, it's split. We don't have majority, very significant majority. Sorry. 35% of you have chosen 3. This is your first choice. 29% of you have chosen 1. It's very close to each other. 23% of you have chosen 4. And then this is your 4th option. Okay? Alright. The author mentions the Welsh language to show that. This is a tricky question. Definitely a tricky question. Let's go back. Let's try to understand why the author mentioned it. Yeah, it's here, the second paragraph. Now see, if you effectively read the passage, you will have a mental map of what information is where. So you can use that mental map to go back. Okay? It's in the second paragraph. The author mentions the Welsh language in the second paragraph. Don't just read that line. Read at least a few lines above so that you understand the context. What is the author talking about here? Now if you clearly remember, I said that, sorry, it's happening, it's a little annoying. Okay. The author mentions the reasons for decline. Okay? Go here. The author mentions the reasons for decline of languages in this paragraph. Okay? The author says that the war, famine, natural disasters happen which wipe out people. Sometimes people live on, but they voluntarily give up their languages, language shift. Okay? Such trading up and out of a speech form occurs for complex political, cultural, and economic reasons, sometimes voluntary for economic and educational reasons, although often amplified by state coercion or neglect. So the government forces people to shift their language, okay, or people do it of their own accord. Welsh, long stigmatized and disparaged by the British state. Welsh is the language. Long stigmatized and disparaged by the British state. It's connected to the previous point. The author says state coerces people, forces people to change their languages. And then it gives you an example that Welsh, which was long stigmatized and disparaged by the British state or the government, has rebounded with vigor. What does this mean? The Welsh language, the British government disparaged, stigmatized the Welsh language. They tried to make it disappear, but now it's rebounding with vigor. It's coming back with a vengeance. It's rebounding with a lot of force. That's what the sentence means. So the government-state coercion is quite important. It's mentioned in that context. Okay, let's go back. The author mentions the Welsh language to show that. Let's try to evaluate this. To show that efforts to integrate Welsh speakers in the English-speaking fold have been fruitless. Is that why the author mentions this? That efforts to integrate Welsh speakers in the English-speaking fold have been fruitless? Fine, I understand that it says that Welsh is rebounding with vigor. Okay, the British government tried to make it disappear. But Welsh is rebounding with vigor. Does that mean that their efforts were fruitless? The efforts of the British government? It's rebounding, okay, it's coming back, but that doesn't mean they were completely fruitless. Number one. And number two, look at the option. Efforts to integrate Welsh speakers in the English-speaking fold. This has a positive connotation. The government wasn't trying to integrate. The British government was employing coercion and make Welsh disappear. So also the connotation is wrong. This makes it sound positive, whereas the author was being negative about it. So there are two aspects as to why this is not the answer. Okay? While often pilloried, globalization can in fact support linguistic revival. Is the author mentioning the Welsh language because of that? Because of saying that okay, globalization can in fact support linguistic revival. It's not connected to this. This point is there in the passage. But the Welsh language example has not been given because of this. Okay? So this is not an answer. Languages can revive even after their speakers have gone through a language shift. Languages can revive. It says Welsh rebounded. Even after their speakers have gone through a language shift. And Welsh did go through a language shift. Why was there a language shift? Because of state coercion. Right? So this seems like the right answer. Let's park it. Vulnerable languages can rebound with state effort. This is completely distorted. Welsh is rebounding in spite of the state trying to make it disappear. The British is not trying to bring back Welsh, or any other government is not responsible for it. That is not mentioned there. They are saying that British was trying to make it disappear, but Welsh is rebounding in spite of that. So this option is completely distorted. The correct answer is number 3. Okay, it's a tricky one. You have to really go and understand the context and then be very, very careful with your option. Okay, alright, let's move on. Let's go to the last question. We'll run the poll, you can attend. Okay, wow, this is an overwhelming majority here. 78% of you have chosen 1. Okay, and 14% of you have chosen 4. And there are a few takers for the remaining options. Let's see. We can infer all of the following about indigenous languages from the passage except that. So again, we can infer all of the following except that means 1 we cannot infer. We have to pick that option. indigenous languages. Okay? Their vocabulary and grammatical constructs have been challenging to document. The passage does talk about vocabulary and grammatical constructs in the first paragraph. Okay? But it says, but indigenous languages are about much more than unusual words and intriguing grammar. Right? They say it's not just about grammar and unusual words, they're very useful because they're beacons for transmission of cultural traditions and other things. So it's not just about unusual words and grammar. Okay? But does it say that their vocabulary and grammatical constructs have been challenging to document? No. You cannot infer that. Let's park this. Their repositories of traditional knowledge about the environment and culture. We just read that. This can't be an answer. Remember, it's except. People are increasingly working on documenting these languages. It says that in the first paragraph itself. They are in danger of being wiped out as most can only be transmitted orally. First paragraph. Oral languages are in the danger of being wiped out. The correct answer is definitely 1. Well done. This was a manageable question. Okay? Alright, well done on this.